Part 1. The Galactic Archive of Innovation was the largest building in the known galaxy. It stood at the center of the Nexus, a meeting place for 2,000 spacefaring civilizations. The archive itself was a tower of living crystal that grew taller each year as new knowledge was added to its halls. Inside its walls were records of every important discovery, every great invention, and every breakthrough that had helped any species reach the stars. Curator had worked in the archive for 300 years. Her species, though, were known throughout the galaxy as keepers of knowledge. They had been collecting and organizing information since before most civilizations had learned to make fire, had seen wonders beyond counting. She had faster-than-light engines and planet-killing weapons. She had documented cures for diseases that had wiped out entire species and technologies that could reshape the surfaces of dead worlds. She had believed, after 3 centuries of this work, that nothing could truly surprise her anymore. Then the humans applied for membership in the galactic community, and everything she thought she knew began to change. Earth was a small world orbiting a yellow star at the edge of the galaxy. Its dominant species had only achieved 300 years ago, which made them practically infants by galactic standards. They had been building libraries when humans were still living in caves. Most of the older civilizations paid little attention to humanity's application. New species joined the community every few decades, and most of them followed predictable patterns. But as the designated curator for Earth's records was required to review their historical files before the application could be approved, it was normally a simple task. She would document their major inventions, note any technologies that might be useful to other species, and file everything away in the appropriate section of the archive. The first file she opened concerned something called the polio vaccine. Polio, she learned, had been a terrible disease on Earth. It attacked the nervous system, leaving victims paralyzed or dead. For centuries, humans had lived in fear of it. Parents kept their children away from swimming pools and public gatherings during the summer months when the disease spread most easily. Entire hospital wards were filled with children encased in metal tubes called iron lungs, machines that breathed for them because their own bodies no longer could. Then, in 1955, a human scientist announced that he had developed a vaccine. It was a simple injection that could protect children from ever getting the disease. Within a decade, polio was nearly wiped out in the developed world. Within 50 years, it had been almost completely eradicated from the entire planet. This was impressive but not unusual. Many species had conquered diseases through vaccination. What caught attention was a small note in the file about the patent. On Earth, as in most galactic civilizations, inventors could claim legal ownership of their creations through something called a patent. This gave them the exclusive right to profit from their invention for a certain number of years. It was standard practice throughout the galaxy. They had patent laws that stretched back over 12,000 years. Wars had been fought over patent disputes. Entire civilizations had risen and fallen based on who controlled the rights to crucial technologies. Had not patented his vaccine. Read the passage 3 times, certain she had misunderstood. She ran the translation algorithm again, checking for errors. But the meaning was clear. When a journalist had asked who owned the patent to his vaccine, he had seemed confused by the question. "The people," he had said. "Could you patent the sun?" The curator sat very still for a long moment. In her 300 years of service, she had never encountered anything like this. The polio vaccine was worth unimaginable wealth. By galactic standards, it would have been enough to make the richest being in his entire solar system. His descendants could have lived in luxury for 1,000 generations. Instead, he had simply given it away. She pulled up another file, hoping this was an isolated incident. It was not. The second file concerned a human named Tim Lee. In 1989, he had invented something called the World Wide Web. It was a system that allowed computers all over Earth to share information with each other instantly. Before the web, finding information required physical travel to libraries or expensive long-distance communication. After the web, any human with a computer could access almost the entire sum of human knowledge in seconds. The web had transformed human civilization. It had accelerated their scientific progress by decades. It had connected billions of minds in ways that had never been possible before. It had laid the groundwork for the technologies that eventually allowed humans to reach the stars. Tim Lee had not patented it either. He had given it away freely, insisting that the web belonged to everyone. He had turned down countless offers of wealth and power, choosing instead to spend his life advocating for keeping the internet open and accessible. When asked why he had not become rich from his invention, he said that making the web proprietary would have destroyed everything that made it valuable in the first place. Felt something she had not experienced in over a century. She felt genuine confusion. She began searching through Earth's records more urgently, looking for other examples. They were not hard to find. In 1959, a company called had invented a three-point safety harness for their vehicles. It was a simple design that held passengers in place during crashes, dramatically reducing deaths and injuries. The technology was so effective that it would eventually save millions of lives. Any company that controlled the patent could have dominated the automotive industry. Instead, released the patent freely, allowing any manufacturer to use the design without paying royalties. They said that some things were more important than profit. A scientist named Norman had developed new farming techniques and crop varieties that prevented over 1 billion people from starving to death. He shared his methods openly with any nation that asked, refusing to let intellectual property laws stand between hungry people and food. A man named Alexander Fleming had discovered penicillin, the first true antibiotic. He deliberately avoided patenting it because he believed medicine should belong to humanity. The files went on and on. Found dozens of examples, then hundreds. Not all human inventors behaved this way, of course. Many of them were just as greedy and protective of their discoveries as any other species. But there was a pattern here, a thread running through human history that she had never seen in any other civilization. Some humans, when they created something truly important, chose to give it away. Thought about her own people's history. They had fought bloody wars over far less valuable technologies. The great patent conflicts had lasted 3,000 years and killed billions. Even now, their civilization was shaped by ancient disputes over who owned which piece of knowledge. It was the same story across the galaxy. The hegemony had collapsed entirely when patent disputes over faster-than-light communication technology tore their empire apart. The mercantile syndicate had built their entire economy around the buying and selling of intellectual property rights. These humans had barely been spacefaring for 3 centuries, and yet they had discovered something that the oldest civilizations in the galaxy had never figured out. They had learned that some knowledge was too important to own. Closed the files and sat in silence for a long time, thinking. Then she did something she had not done in over a century. She called an emergency meeting of the Archive Council. When the other curators arrived, she displayed the files on the great crystalline screen at the center of the chamber. She showed them and Tim Lee. She showed them and Norman and Alexander Fleming. She showed them the thread of selflessness that ran through human history like a vein of gold through stone. This species, she told the assembled curators, has discovered something we need to study very carefully. They have learned how to set knowledge free. The council members exchanged uncertain glances. Some of them seemed skeptical, others seemed afraid, but could see that a few of them understood. Humanity was about to change everything. Part 2. The Chamber of 10,000 Worlds was the largest meeting space in the galactic community. Its walls were lined with viewing platforms for representatives from every member civilization. Holographic translation fields filled the air, converting speech into thousands of languages simultaneously. The chamber had been designed to hold the most important debates in galactic history, from declarations of war to treaties that reshaped the boundaries between empires. Today, it held a single human woman. Doctor stood at the center of the chamber, looking remarkably calm for someone facing the combined scrutiny of 2,000 civilizations. She was tall and dark-skinned, with streaks in her close-cropped hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She wore simple clothing that seemed almost deliberately plain compared to the ornate robes and ceremonial armor of the galactic delegates surrounding her. She had been summoned to explain something that most of those delegates found completely impossible to understand. 6 months ago, Doctor had announced a breakthrough in carbon capture technology. Her invention could pull greenhouse gases from planetary atmospheres and convert them into stable materials with unprecedented efficiency. The technology was revolutionary. It could terraform dead worlds in decades rather than centuries. It could save dying ecosystems. It could reverse the damage that industrial civilizations had done to their home planets. It was worth more money than most species could count. Doctor had refused to patent it. She had released all of her research freely, published her designs in open databases, and invited anyone who wanted to improve on her work to do so without restriction. The galactic community had been watching humanity for several decades now, ever since Curator's report had sparked widespread interest in Earth's unusual relationship with intellectual property. But this was different. This was a technology that every civilization in the galaxy wanted, and this human had simply given it away. The delegates wanted to know why. Ambassador of the Mercantile Syndicate spoke first. His species resembled tall insects, with compound eyes and chitinous plates covering their bodies. They had built the largest trading empire in the galaxy, and their economy was based almost entirely on the buying and selling of patents and intellectual property rights. The concept of giving away valuable technology was not just strange to them. It was almost physically painful. "You expect us to believe your motivations are pure altruism," demanded. His translator crackled with obvious skepticism. "Your species is barely post-industrial. You have been spacefaring for only 3 centuries. What is your angle here? What do you gain from this action?" Doctor smiled. The expression seemed to make several delegates uncomfortable. They had learned that human smiles could indicate either friendliness or predatory intent, and they were never quite sure which. "I gain exactly what I wanted," she said. "The technology gets used." His compound eyes glittered. "That is not an answer." "It is the only answer," Doctor replied calmly. "Every year I spend fighting patent battles is a year that dying ecosystems do not get saved. Every credit I spend on lawyers is a credit that does not go toward research. I am a scientist, ambassador. My reward is seeing the work matter." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The delegate, a young scholar named who had been specifically chosen for his expertise in human affairs, leaned forward. "But your corporations, your governments," he said. "Surely they demanded ownership. We have studied your economic systems. We know that humans value profit as much as any species. How did you resist the pressure to monetize your discovery?" Doctor nodded, acknowledging the fairness of the question. "There was pressure," she admitted. "My university offered me tenure and a building with my name on it if I would let them hold the patent. 3 different governments offered me citizenship and protection in exchange for exclusive rights. A consortium of corporations offered me enough money to buy a small island." "And you refused all of them?" The sounded genuinely amazed. "I grew up in Lagos," Doctor said. "Do you know where that is?" Most of the delegates did not, so she continued. "It is a city on the coast of Africa on Earth. When I was a child, the sea level was rising. Every year, the water came a little closer. By the time I left for university, my grandmother's village did not exist anymore. It was under the ocean." She paused, letting the translation fields carry her words to every corner of the chamber. "What good is an island," she asked quietly, "when the whole planet is drowning?" The chamber fell silent. The delegate, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline shell, consulted frantically with legal advisors. The concept Doctor had just expressed was genuinely alien to most galactic civilizations. The idea that some problems were too urgent for profit margins, that some emergencies made ownership itself seem petty and small, this was not how interstellar empires thought. Curator, who had been granted a special seat in the chamber due to her expertise on human innovation patterns, finally asked the question that had been haunting her for decades. "Is this common among your kind?" she asked. "This willingness to surrender potential wealth for collective benefit?" Doctor considered the question carefully before answering. "Common enough," she said. "Not universal. We have our hoarders and our gatekeepers, same as anyone. We have people who would watch the world burn before they gave up a single credit of profit. But somewhere along the way, some of us figured something out." "And what is that?" asked. "That knowledge locked away is knowledge wasted." Doctor turned slowly, addressing the entire chamber now. "The best ideas want to be free. They want to spread and mutate and improve. You cannot optimize something if you are the only one working on it. 1,000 minds will always find solutions that one mind would miss." She gestured toward the viewing platforms above her. "Look at all of you. 2,000 civilizations, each with your own scientists and engineers and dreamers. Imagine what we could accomplish if we stopped treating knowledge like a weapon to be hoarded. Imagine what we could build if we started treating it like a gift to be shared." The mercantile ambassador made a sound that the translator rendered as dismissive laughter. "And who would fund research if there was no profit to be made from it? Your idealism is charming, human, but it ignores basic economic reality." Doctor raised an eyebrow. "I funded my research with grants from governments and foundations that believed in the work. Tim Lee built the World Wide Web while working for a research institution that valued discovery over profit. Developed the polio vaccine at a university. The profit motive is one way to fund innovation, ambassador. It is not the only way." "You are describing exceptions," insisted. "Outliers." "Perhaps," Doctor acknowledged. "Or perhaps we are describing the future. Perhaps the species that survive long enough to become truly advanced are the ones who learn this lesson. Perhaps the civilizations that treat knowledge as a competition eventually destroy themselves fighting over it." That statement sent a visible ripple of discomfort through the chamber. The hegemony had collapsed over patent disputes. They had nearly destroyed themselves in the great patent conflicts. Even the mercantile syndicate had lost entire colony worlds to wars over intellectual property rights. "I am not naive," Doctor continued. "I know that my approach is not always practical. I know that some technologies are too dangerous to share freely, and some research requires resources that only large organizations can provide. But I also know that every time humanity has chosen to share our most important discoveries, we have moved forward faster than we ever could have alone." She spread her hands. A gesture that the delegates had learned indicated openness and honesty. "My carbon capture technology is already being improved by teams on a dozen worlds. Changes and refinements that would have taken me years to discover on my own are being made in months. By next year, the technology will be twice as effective as it was when I released it. That is what happens when you let knowledge breathe." Curator made a note in her records. She would be studying this testimony for years to come. Already, she could see that Doctor's words were having an effect on some of the delegates. Not all of them, certainly, and his faction would never be convinced, but others were listening with expressions of genuine thoughtfulness. Perhaps humanity was not just a curiosity to be studied. Perhaps they were a model to be followed. The testimony lasted several more hours. Doctor answered questions about economics and motivation, about human history and psychology, about the practical challenges of open-source research. She never lost her patience, never raised her voice, never seemed anything less than completely certain of her position. When it was finally over, approached her. You know that many of them will never accept what you are saying, the curator said. Their entire civilizations are built on the opposite principles. Doctor nodded. I know, but some of them will listen, and that is enough to start. She looked up at the viewing platforms, now slowly emptying as delegates returned to their duties. Change happens slowly, she said. One mind at a time, but it happens. Part 3. 50 years had passed since Doctor stood before the chamber of 10,000 worlds and spoke about setting knowledge free. The galaxy had changed in ways that nobody could have predicted. Curator stood before an enormous crowd of delegates, scientists, and dignitaries from across the known galaxy. She was old now, even by standards, but her eyes were still sharp and her voice was still strong. Today she was not just a curator. She was the chief archivist of the entire Galactic Innovation Archive, the highest position her species had ever achieved in that institution. Today she was dedicating a new wing of the archive. It was called the Commons. The building itself was beautiful, a sweeping structure of crystal and light that seemed to grow naturally from the older towers around it. But its beauty was not what made it special. What made it special was what happened inside. The Commons operated on principles that would have seemed completely insane to the galaxy's great empires just a century ago. Any technology deposited within its walls could be freely accessed by any civilization. Any scientist from any world could study the designs, modify them, improve them, and share their improvements back. There were no patents, no ownership disputes, no lawyers arguing over who had the right to use which piece of knowledge. The only rule was simple. If you improved something, you had to share your improvements with everyone else. The idea had come from human software developers. On Earth, before humanity had even reached the stars, programmers had built entire operating systems using this principle. They called it open source. They had proven that collaboration could produce better results than competition. They had shown that knowledge wanted to be free. The galactic civilizations had been skeptical at first. The mercantile syndicate had called it idealistic nonsense. The older empires had warned that it would lead to chaos and exploitation. Even some of despite their respect for human innovation patterns, had doubted whether the concept could scale to a galactic level. The results had silenced them all. In the 50 years since the Commons had opened, collaborative projects had produced advances that no single civilization could have achieved alone. A medical scanner combined with quantum processing and human interface design had produced diagnostic tools that could identify diseases before symptoms even appeared. Millions of lives had been saved. A joint terraforming project using technologies from 12 different species had restored 3 dead worlds in the time it would have taken any single civilization to restore one. A universal translation algorithm developed by over 100 research teams had eliminated language barriers that had existed since the first civilizations learned to speak. The Commons had become the most productive research collaboration in recorded galactic history. Looked out at the crowd and felt something she had not experienced in a very long time. She felt hope. 300 years ago, she began, I opened a file about a human named. He had developed a vaccine that saved millions of lives, and when asked who owned it, he said that it belonged to the people. He asked if you could patent the sun. The crowd listened in respectful silence. Many of them knew this story. It had become one of the founding myths of the Commons. At the time, I did not understand what I was reading. My species had fought wars over far less valuable technologies. The idea that someone would willingly give away something so precious seemed impossible. It seemed irrational. It seemed like weakness. She paused, letting her words settle. I was wrong. A holographic display behind her began cycling through images, and Tim Lee, Norman and the engineers at Alexander Fleming and hundreds of others whose names were inscribed on the walls of the Commons. And there, near the end, Doctor, who had lived just long enough to see the first collaborative projects begin before passing away peacefully at the age of 92. These humans taught us something that we should have learned ago, continued. They taught us that some resources multiply when shared: knowledge, innovation, hope. These are not finite things to be hoarded. They grow when they are given away. They become more valuable when everyone can use them. She gestured toward the Commons building behind her. This structure represents everything we learned from humanity. But more than that, it represents what we became when we finally listened to them. We became partners instead of competitors. We became collaborators instead of rivals. We became, for perhaps the first time in galactic history, a true community. In the crowd, Ambassador stood near the front. He was very old now, one of the few survivors of the original generation who had heard Doctor's testimony. His compound eyes were clouded with age, and his chitinous plates had faded to a pale gray. But he was still sharp enough to appreciate the irony of his presence here. The mercantile syndicate still existed, but it had changed. The new generation of traders dealt in services and experiences, in things that could not be simply and shared. The old model of hoarding knowledge for profit had not disappeared entirely, but it had been pushed to the margins. The Commons had proven that cooperation was more profitable than competition, at least for the technologies that truly mattered. Had spent his career believing that resources were finite and competition was inevitable. He had been wrong. He had lived long enough to see it proven. After the ceremony, he made his way slowly to where was standing. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I spent decades fighting against everything you and the humans were trying to build. I was convinced it would fail." Tilted her head, a gesture of acknowledgement. "You were not alone in your doubts," she said. "Many of us took years to understand what humanity was showing us." "How did you know?" asked. "How did you see it so clearly when the rest of us were blind?" The chief archivist considered the question for a long moment. "I did not know," she admitted. "I simply paid attention. The evidence was there in the files I was reviewing. Humanity had a pattern of behavior that was unlike anything else in our records. When they created something truly important, some of them chose to give it away. And every time they did, their entire species moved forward." She looked out at the Commons, where scientists from 100 worlds were already filing through the doors, eager to continue their collaborative work. "The humans did not invent altruism," she continued. "Every species has individuals who care about more than themselves, but humanity built systems around that impulse. They created institutions and traditions that rewarded sharing. They celebrated their liberators as heroes. They made selflessness into a strategy." Made a sound that his translator rendered as a thoughtful hum. "And we had never thought to do the same." "We had never believed it could work," corrected. "We were so certain that competition was the only path to progress that we never seriously tried the alternative. It took a species of infants, barely out of their cradle, to show us what we had been missing." In the archive's historical records, a new category had been created alongside inventors and discoverers. It was labeled simply liberators. The term referred to those who had freed knowledge from the cage of ownership, who had chosen to give their creations to the universe rather than hoarding them for personal gain. The list had been growing longer every year. It included humans, of course, but also and members of 100 other species who had learned the lesson. Young scientists across the galaxy were now choosing to release their work freely, inspired by the examples that had come before them. The galaxy was changing. Not all at once and not everywhere. There were still wars and conflicts, still competition and greed, still beings who believed that power came from controlling what others needed. The old ways had not disappeared, but a new path had opened, and more travelers were walking it every year. Thought about the young curator she had been 300 years ago, sitting in her office and trying to understand why a human scientist had refused to patent a vaccine. She had not known then that she was witnessing the beginning of a revolution. She had simply been confused. Now she understood. The humans had given the galaxy something more valuable than any single technology. They had given it a template for cooperation. They had proven that beings could choose abundance over scarcity, that progress could be measured in problems solved rather than profits earned, that civilization could advance faster when knowledge was free. The sun was setting over the Nexus, painting the crystal towers in shades of gold and orange. Watched as the last of the delegates made their way into the Commons, ready to begin another night of collaborative work. Had asked if you could patent the sun. The galaxy had finally learned the answer. No, the sun belonged to everyone, and so did the light.